Yeah, you like the meeting.
Good evening. Welcome to the March 25th, 2019 meeting of the Stillwater City Council and the Stillwater Utilities Authority. We're going to go crazy tonight, and we're going to start with the SUA. Because it's exciting, right? Yes. Everybody excited? Lauren's excited. All right, so I will call the Stillwater Utilities Authority meeting to order. And I will ask Mr. McNichol to kick us off with general orders.
And Lauren Smith, Stillwater Electric.
That's why we're going to go first.
Director will
Thank you, trustees.
have their report.
Good evening. Lauren Smith, Electric Utility Director. During the March GRDA board meeting, they approved two new economic development riders that the City of Stillwater can take advantage of. These riders were designed to increase load, to incentivize load growth in the GRDA communities. I'd like to thank Jerry Cook and Ash Mayfield from GRDA for traveling here this evening to help explain these in detail. And so with that, I'll have Ash Mayfield come up and give you guys some more information on the two riders.
Well, good evening. Before I get started, I know this might prompt some eye rolls from the non-legal folks in the room. I am legal counsel for GRDA. I have to say before we start that the stuff I say tonight is not intended to be legal advice to the City of Stillwater, right? The city is represented adequately by counsel, and just something I have to say before we get going. As we open the meeting with, the GRDA has approved two economic development riders. And the purpose for this is that we believe to be partners. GRDA and the cities are partners with each other. Our success is intertwined. And if cities' load grows, if they can develop new load, if they can attract new load, it's a win for the city, it's a win for us. Against that backdrop, there are two classes of riders. Class one is for big loads, large loads, right? And the idea is that for these big loads, if the load meets certain characteristics, if it's big enough, then the city can get $1.50 demand credit against these loads, which the city can either keep or pass on completely to the loads or pass on in part to the loads. And I won't bore you with the rate-making jargon and all the math that goes into it, but the net effect is that if the city utility elects to pass this credit on to the loads, for example, you're in the running, you're in competition to get this new big load. It's a megawatt load. It's going to result in a lot of jobs for the community. It's going to result in some revenue. The city can make the decision to pass this credit on from GRDA to attract and win the load and eventually get a long-term customer. We recognized also that not all cities share equal footing in attracting these big types of loads. We serve all sorts of cities. Some cities have a lot of residential development. Some cities have small commercial development, and so we didn't want to make a rider program that was so restrictive that it limited the savings only to the large loads, and so we have this Class 2 rider. The Class 2 rider measures the city's net growth from a baseline, and it's a little bit of an oversimplification, but the essence of it is that you measure the baseline, the difference between the baseline and what your load is today, and that delta, that difference, is eligible for this $1.50 credit. We think that these programs kind of mix the best features of both of our types of customers, that they create these incentives that will help the customers, help you guys, help other cities attract and retain load, and we're proud to offer them to you and to our other customers. I'll try to answer any questions that you have, if you have any.
I'm going to try and see if I understand this. Is our community almost at that 500? I mean, is this are we going to have to change behaviors or what? I mean, are we close to this?
That's a great point, and one that I should have made from the get-go is this is a completely optional rider. You don't have to do either one of these. They're just tools that you have in your tool belt to use them if you want them. This 500 kW threshold is think of it like a big commercial facility, right? Or maybe a small industrial facility. And so the city as a whole is much, much larger than this. This would be if the city is competing for manufacturing. Okay, a good-sized manufacturing facility would far exceed the 500 kW threshold, and you could use this incentive to come in and help recruit this load to the city. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah,
Okay.
it helps, yeah, thank you.
There's a note in the report about these being taken advantage of one at a time. Could you explain that?
Yes, sir. The programs are designed to be offered independently. And so you can either take advantage of the net growth, the growth from the baseline, or the large individual loads. But what we didn't want is for one customer to take advantage of both, because that would double dip and it would put the other customers at a disadvantage. And so if you start on the Class 2, on the net growth rider, which is a great place to start, and you get a new big load in the future, you can always migrate from the net growth to the large load rider. That pathway is there, it's built into the process. You cannot, however, migrate from the large load rider to the net growth. So it's a one-way process.
What's the downside?
You know, to the net growth rider, there really is not a downside. This is only available because GRDA has some excess capacity right now. We're in a slightly surplus capacity position, and we are responsible to pay the fixed cost of this capacity regardless. And so the rationale is that if our marginal cost to serve this load, if the city gets some load, and the marginal cost covers at least all of our variables and covers some of the fixed, then all customers are better off under this program. In other words, the new load helps everybody. The only downside for the large load rider would be that if you offer, let's say that you offer the entire $1.50 discount to a new large customer, and the customer comes in and they take advantage of the discount and they locate in this area. And maybe the load doesn't materialize, right? And you think, well, that's not too bad because I'm not offering the $1.50 discount for the load that didn't materialize. It's more of an opportunity cost. However, under that scenario, you wouldn't be able to take advantage of the net growth rider. And so you'd maybe leave some money, some opportunity on the table because you're not using the net growth rider.
It sounds like that's one you want to keep in your pocket and make
It may
sure
be.
you really got some. Okay. Trustees, any further questions?
I really appreciate your summary. It made a lot of pages clear.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, kind of in closing, the idea is that initially going to the net rider, any credits that we would get would be placed in an economic development dedicated fund for us to use, or really for us to determine how we want to use that. There is a recommendation. Staff recommends the trustees approve alternative 1 and 2, which are accept both new riders as written and authorize staff to sign the WPEDSR2 rider. This will allow the SUA to immediately see results and benefits from the credit.
Okay. And then with the understanding that if there was some reason to switch to the other rider in the future, we could do that?
Absolutely.
Okay. And there's no, I mean, signing these riders in the first place makes really no difference unless there's a change.
Right,
I mean,
unless there's that
no
opportunity for
investment
change.
that the city's making or cost or anything.
Right.
All right, trustees, further questions, comments? Are we making decisions on this item?
Sir?
I guess you made a recommendation.
Yes.
All right.
Sounds good. Motion to accept staff alternative.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the staff recommendation of accepting alternatives 1 and 2, accepting both riders and signing the WPEDSR2 rider. Please vote. The vote of 5-0, that item is approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. That takes us to General Orders Item 2, Surplus Funds Update and Possible Deployment of Funds. Mr. McNichol.
And our Finance Director, Christy Cluck, will provide that report.
Good evening, Christy Cluck, Finance Director. And the recommendation from staff that's before you at this time is the deployment of $7 million in surplus funds from the SUA to the city for capital needs. This surplus balance was derived after a full review of the cash balances of the SUA, as well as calculating the appropriate reserve levels that are needed to be retained within the SUA. And you will be hearing a presentation on recommended reserve levels in the council meeting a little bit later this evening. But this $7 million balance is made up of two components. And so one of those components is $3.9 million, which is the remaining balance of the administratively designated reserve fund. And the other component is $3.1 million, which is the projected available cash balance at the end of fiscal year 20 in the SUA operating fund. And I would be happy to elaborate on kind of how we came to the point of having these funds as surplus if you'd like me to.
I think we would.
Yes, yes.
All right. So the administratively designated reserve fund was established in 2006. It was established as a lump sum reserve, and it was housed in the SUA. It was intended to satisfy the needs of the city and the SUA in the event of an emergency. And so as early as 2010, the SUA began to take steps to kind of firm up the funding of not only an emergency situation, but also the funding of repair and replacement of our aging infrastructure. And so those steps were rate adjustments and also building up of reserves within the individual utility funds. And so as the reserve balances began to grow in those individual utility funds, kind of the need for that administratively designated reserve began to deteriorate. And that's why you saw staff bring forth a recommendation in October to deploy $3.5 million of that for city capital purposes.
So we saved money over here, and then we started saving money over here as well. And so now all this money that we've saved over on this side kind of makes this money that we saved initially not needed for what we saved it for? That make any sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
We've saved too much
We
money.
kind of changed philosophies in how the reserves were being.
But we still have reserves in place to deal with the same emergencies that
Yes.
those funds were initially set aside for.
Correct.
But we've just now saved them twice, and so we're spending the first money we saved.
Reaching the point of that.
Okay.
Yes. So since October, staff has been reviewing reserve levels. We've been evaluating cash balances, and like I said, you'll hear a presentation on that later. And we do feel that we have sufficient reserves in place, which allows us, like you said, to release these funds for another purpose. And so then on the $3.1 million, this is projected to be available cash balance come the end of fiscal year 20, and in large part, this is due to the decrease of the transfer from the SUA operating fund into the rate stabilization fund. So we have been making transfers into that fund since its inception in the late 80s. Over the past 5 years, that transfer has been anywhere from $5 to $7 million. And so as staff has reviewed the 5-year capital plan over these last few months and done some cash flow projections on the electric utility, we do feel that capping that transfer to $4 million at this time still allows for us to meet the needs of the electric utility.
So again, saving more than we, at this point, really think we need to save?
At this point,
Okay. I think that's a good problem to have. It sounds like a good problem to have. I mean, it sounds like we've been pretty conservative and put a lot of money in reserve in the past, and now we're sort of reevaluating that and projecting out future needs and saying, well, we actually probably have a little bit more in savings here, so we can use it for some of our immediate needs instead.
right, correct.
It's a good problem to have, and it's also nice to note in the notes that the automatic increase of rates in January was kiboshed.
Yes.
and that we will continue on the track of doing a rate study.
Yes, that is, actually, we have interviews scheduled with some consultants in the very near future.
Because you could look at this good problem to have from two directions.
Sure. Still a problem to have, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good point to maybe just elaborate on a little bit, because I don't know that everybody maybe even realizes what you're talking about when you say the automatic rate increase.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the policy of the, if we did not, and you'll have to correct me if this is not, if we had not raised rates, there's an automatic raiser every January.
Every January for electric.
Yeah.
Yes. And for water and wastewater, we have the same thing in the absence of trustee action. That one's effective in July, but we will be bringing a recommendation that we also cease that escalator until the cost of service study's done.
Great.
And again, I mean, just to maybe just harp on this a little bit, but that was put in place as sort of a, let's make sure there's enough saved and
Sure.
put away in the rate stabilization fund, so that if there is a big repair needed, that sort of thing, we don't have to come back and say, hey, we've got to raise everybody rates
Right.
5%
Yeah,
because we've got this big
It's a
spend.
thoughtful
Yes.
policy.
Yeah. But, yeah, and we're looking at it now saying, well, we've saved enough to cover all the potential contingencies we see, and so let's hold off with that automatic increase, reestablish, look at our rates, whether they actually need to be where they are, and move forward from there.
Yes.
All right, we interrupted your presentation, I
No,
think.
actually, that concluded what I had prepared, so.
So what is the staff recommendation on this item?
So the recommendation is to deploy $7 million in surplus revenues of the SUA to the city capital fund for fiscal year 20, sorry.
Fiscal year 1920?
Yes.
Okay.
And this recommendation is included in the budget presentations you'll see later this evening
Yes.
as well.
Okay. Any further questions, trustees?
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I just would like to note at this point, I mean, this is we'd had the same discussion in October, correct, with those other funds, where we, I think we all really need to thank city finance staff and city staff overall for going back and doing the research and all this planning and work to sort of see, there is the city budget is very complicated. We've done a good job over the years of kind of putting money in places to make sure we had it when we needed it, but that also means we have to go back and figure out, okay, where is it? Is it still being used for that purpose we had? And I think the idea of saying saving is great and being ready for the future is great, but we also have immediate needs that we need to be using that money for, and so being able to reevaluate that and change course when it's necessary and prudent is a good thing. So we really do appreciate the work that city staff has done to reevaluate and look at these funds. Trustees, are there any motions on this recommendation?
Motion for the staff recommendation of the deployment of $7.0 million in surplus revenues of the SUA into the capital fund for FY 2019-2020.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to accept staff recommendation. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, that item is approved. All right, that takes us down to reports from officers and boards. Mr. Dorman.
No items, sir.
Mr. McNichol.
No item, sir.
Trustees,
No item?
is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the Stillwater Utilities Authority meeting. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, the Utilities Authority is now adjourned. All right, that takes us over to the Stillwater City Council meeting for March 25th, 2019. I'll call this meeting to order. And we will jump right into general orders on item A, recommendation to reinstitute the Homebuyer Assistance Program, CC-19-33. It looks like
Well,
Melissa will be.
If you'll bear with me for a minute, Melissa's going to give you a bit of a brief
I wanted-
review of what we're.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we'll go to home buyers. I
Oh,
promise
okay.
We'll get there. Melissa Reams, Chief Financial Officer. And Christy kind of alluded to a lot of what has gone on since October of 2018. We have started looking at all monies, everything in the city, really trying to adhere to some of the strategies in the strategic plan, and I know our viewers can't see this, but the strategic plan that you all talked about in your January study session. And one of those is in strategic priority number 1, it's objective 1.2, continue to align revenues and expenditures while maintaining appropriate reserve levels. That's exactly what Christy was speaking to just a few minutes ago. And in a lot of ways, it's a problem, but it's a great problem to have, because we're trying to go in and really adjust everything and make sure that we are being as effective and efficient with the resources that have been entrusted to us. Just in review, we've had a lot of change in staff, of key staff members since 2015 when I came on board. There have been a lot of people in those high levels come and go. One of the good practices, best practice, is when you have this change in leadership, you take a step back and you look at policies and procedures and you evaluate what's there and really ask the question, is it still effective? Is it still efficient? Is it still meeting the business model that we have in place? Charter Review Committee also, back in 2016, asked for a reserve policy to be in place, and so we've been working on that, along with some just evaluations of budgeting principles. How do we budget? There's a lot of philosophies, as I've shared with you in the past, about budgeting. What we're adhering to now is a zero-based budget. In fact, you would start from zero every year. And based on the tactics that you're going to use to implement the objectives that are in that strategic plan, you build your budget around those tactics. And the benchmark that we're using is a 3-year average. Doesn't necessarily mean that the expenditure budget is set at the 3-year average, but it's certainly a good, easy benchmark as we're reviewing budgets to just kind of buzz down through there and say, high, low, what do we need to pay attention to? Do we have justification for that? We've evaluated the transfer policy, and if you'll remember, we instituted the new transfer policy from the SUA into the general fund. I want to say that was in the spring of 2016, where the SUA started telling the general fund, this is what I can afford to transfer to you, as opposed to the general fund saying, well, this is what we'll use to make the budget balance. It's a more proactive approach in my viewpoint. We've also looked at the rate structure. Christy's right. We're getting ready to do interviews with our 2 finalists. We're really excited about that. GRDA, as another good partner, is going to help fund the electric rate study for us. Jerry told me just a little while ago they have $10,000 penciled in for us for that electric rate study. So again, we need to be very appreciative of our partnership with GRDA. And just communication with you, the counselors, with our audit committee, and with our citizens. Megan is going to bring you a report this evening about our new citizen engagement tool called Balancing Act. And it's very interesting. I hope you found it interesting when you go back and you review how many people have been in there, what kinds of things have they moved around, and what comments have they left. Flash vote. I think the first vote that we put out there, or the first survey that we put out there, was very well received, and I think our citizens are looking for that next survey. They're anxious to let us know what they think. We are working on hopefully a more reader-friendly budget presentation, and I'm really working towards you seeing that at our April 15th public hearing. More information, but more reader-friendly and more usable. So that's kind of where we are today. Paula is going to give us an overview on, and this would be economic development incentive. It also would be a way to incentivize what we think is affordable homes here in Stillwater, and it's a home buyers assistance program. So I'm going to turn the podium over to Paula.
Good evening. Paula Dennison out of the City Manager's Office. We had provided a report to give you just a little history of the Homebuyers Assistance and Homebuyers Education Program that the City of Stillwater had in place. 1999 is when it was started under grant funding from the Oklahoma Department of Commerce. It changed over. Oklahoma Department of Commerce discontinued that grant in 2007, and Oklahoma Housing Finance Agency picked up that grant. So we were through the OFA at that time until we ended the program in 2010. And the homebuyers education classes ended in 2012 because we were still helping out in teaching some of those classes.
Do we know why?
Why?
Was there a budget reason that we cut
Program
the
ended,
program,
yes.
or was it a, okay.
Yes, there was. And the criteria under which we were operating when it went to OFA was different from that at Department of Commerce. And we had less flexibility in our needs here in the city. It was more of a what are the needs of the state, and that's the criteria that we were operating under through OFA. As you can see in your report, we loaned up to $5,000 to qualifying individuals or families to use as down payment and closing cost in the purchase of a home inside the corporate limits of Stillwater. And there were certain criteria that had to be met. I had included the policy guidelines along with the report. One of the things I'd like to call out is one of the criteria is that the value of any property purchased with these funds may not exceed 95% of the median price for that type of property for Payne County, Oklahoma. I recently checked on the census website, and the median value of owner-occupied housing just in Stillwater, not in all of Payne County, but just in Stillwater, is quite high. It's $162,300. So 95% of that is, well, I had it somewhere. It's about 150-ish thousand that anyone under this program, if we were still continuing to operate it, would be able to qualify to purchase that value of a home here in Stillwater.
That would be the max value of a home you could buy with assistance from the program?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And I assume if you put all of Payne County into that, that price comes down.
Yes, it does. So once the assistance was provided, it was filed as a second mortgage on the property. The period of affordability was for a term of 5 years. That required the receiver of the assistance to reside in that property, in that house, as their primary principal residence for that period of 5 years. And upon annual verification that they were still there, met the criteria, at the end of the 5-year period, we would release the second mortgage. So the loan was forgiven, the debt was forgiven. And that was a great incentive for encouraging ownership, home ownership within the city of Stillwater. Now, yes, there were some that did not fulfill the 5-year period of affordability. And each of the programs was different. Commerce and OFA, they had different requirements. Commerce, no matter when that period of affordability ended with the receiver, they had to pay back the entire amount of the assistance. Under OFA, it was based on how many months you had stayed in the property and met the criteria, and then the remaining months, it was 1/60th each month is what you had to pay back. So it was a reduced amount that was had to pay back then. Of course, the city had to match with this grant. Under Commerce, it was a 1-to-1 match. Under OFA, theirs was I believe it was 75-25%, and OFA was carrying the 75%. any of the funds that we currently have, and we do have just over $37,000 in this account, those are funds that have been collected based on, it was the city's match part where the period of affordability had not been completely fulfilled, so they had to pay back something. So that came back directly to the city. OFAs went to OFA, Commerce went to Commerce. This is our money that we had used initially. A couple of things I think are quite important for us to note, and especially to the audiences. Through the life of this program, there were just over 1,100, that's a big number, homebuyer education attendees. Homebuyer education class is one of the requirements to receive this assistance. That's a lot of people who were educated on what you have to be able to do, the cost when you own your own property. Something as simple as the water heater goes out, it's up to you, not your landlord now, to be responsible for that. Buying a lawnmower, mowing the grass, or paying someone to mow the grass. Those are things that not everybody thinks about. So those classes are great. 316 properties inside city limits were purchased. 511 individuals, and by individuals I mean the assistance was provided to 511 people. That could be multiple people in a household. Total of all of the funds through Commerce, OFA, and the city match was just over $1.1 million, and that's enormous investment into our community and that owner-occupied. So currently, we have $37,185 available. Staff would like to re-implement this Homebuyers Assistance and Homebuyers Education program. We ask that the City Council direct us to develop the policy and guidelines and fully develop the program to bring back to you for approval, and to utilize this $37,000 in the upcoming fiscal year 20 budget. Be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Counselors?
Paula, on the, in the packet, it says the home buyer education class and the financial literacy class or credit counseling class.
Yes.
Who offers those? Where do you find those classes?
We, Valerie Silvers as our grants coordinator, she is the certified home buyer education teacher, and she has assistance in teaching the other classes, yes. A lot of times we would have a bank or a real estate agency sponsor the class, so lunch would be provided, and then Valerie would reach out to other entities that would help come in and teach certain portions of the class. So that's one of the teachers is included in that. Anything else?
When you do the policy, as you said, 90% of the median home price in Stillwater is actually about $154,000.
It's quite high.
It doesn't sound like it fits into the actual formula for affordable housing, which is, I can't remember what that formula is, but it's something else.
Yeah, it's HUD, according to HUD, it is no more than 30% of your net income goes toward your housing cost. So that qualifies someone or a family as needing that affordable house. And with this, as so directed by the council, we would develop the policy and guidelines based on any direction that y'all provide us tonight. If 95% is too high, then since we're not operating under OFA or Commerce, we are not bound to their criteria.
Do we have good inventory of those, that price range of homes for purchase?
Easy to obtain. We work very closely with the Board of Realtors in getting any of that information.
is this grant program not still offered through the state?
The focus of the Oklahoma Housing Finance Association now is mainly multifamily.
We have plenty of that.
They're really leaning towards multifamily.
So this would be something that we would try to manage, run, and
Seed
fund
ourselves, yes,
on
sir.
our own.
And that is another part of the ask, and I know fiscal year '21 budget is a while away, but if authorized to use the current money we have available for this upcoming fiscal year budget, then just be thinking about and pondering the program and how it could be funded for the budgets after that.
I mean, do you have a thought or an idea about where that money would come from in the future?
Not yet. That's one of the things that we would bring back to y'all.
Okay.
Is this something so time-intensive that you would need other staff?
Yes, this would not, additional staff over and above what we have. I would not suspect so. I could believe that our grants coordinator had operated this as well as teaching the classes as well as the CDBG grants and helping write any other grants for any CD departments, one individual. So I do believe that this can be managed by current staff that we have.
Counselors?
Is there a definition for affordable homes other than 30% of a person's net income?
Some communities have established that definition. Stillwater has not. I have not.
It's by city by city?
Yes. And we can certainly look around the state and bring back any of that as we move forward with this, if that's the will of the council. A lot of it is subject to, of course, what's available in the community, what the median income is in the community. Population actually has a lot to do with it. So a lot of influences on what is affordable for each individual community.
I just think it would be helpful to know a figure that you could bounce off, so you would actually know if there are any homes
Right.
at all
Right.
in that range.
Because we want the program to be successful, obviously, so making sure that it fits what the Stillwater community, what makes sense for us.
Absolutely, yes. And we quite often talk with developers who are looking to build a little more of the affordable type housing and not the 200,000 plus.
Well, I mean, affordable without a real formula is pretty subjective. So I would really like to see some Stillwater.
Is some of that background and statistics and information, would that be part of your development of policy, is giving us some of that background on inventory and costs? And
Absolutely.
all the things that you just
Yes.
said went into understanding affordable housing and what the definition of that might look like for our community?
Yes, it certainly would. One of the things I had already pulled up was the income in Stillwater, the median household income between 2013 and 2017, and this is in 2017 dollars, $29,450.
Yeah, so I mean, from an overall perspective on this, I mean, I'm certainly in favor of using, looking at this funding and saying, let's start to put this program together and see what we can do and see if there is a program that we think we can, that would be helpful and successful for some of the folks in Stillwater to be able to buy property. So, but I mean, I think, we certainly would want to see
Yes.
what those numbers look like. If we're going to kind of run this ourselves, we're going to have the freedom and the responsibility, I guess, of setting those parameters where they responsibly help our community. So I guess you would have some fairly clear direction there. Do we need a vote on this item, or is this one of those advise staff to move forward sort of things?
But
At this point, you're just developing the criteria. This is probably just an advice.
Yeah.
I think when we bring back the final product is, and one of the issues is that affordable housing definition is such a
Yeah.
moving target.
Yeah.
Councilor Darlington provided me an article the other day regarding Broken Arrow, or it was Broken Arrow. And their median income was considerably higher. And that too is kind of nebulous in Stillwater because of the number of students that don't make any income that are folded into the mix. So by Broken Arrow standards, it would be a $90,000 house that would be deemed affordable in Stillwater. And the current Habitat houses are costing that much without the labor that would go into a commercially available home. So I'm not sure how you do that. Because I don't know how you separate the number of students that make no income that go into that whole median income or mean income formula with any certainty.
Well, Paul is going to solve it for us, right?
I have.
I'm going to attempt.
Every confidence.
With many other staff, I'm going to pull them.
Yeah, well,
If you have any ideas, let us know.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's a worthy effort, and we appreciate you guys bringing it up and looking for this opportunity, and we look forward to seeing what you come up with.
Okay, great, thank you.
One other question, does Habitat require their
yeah.
homeowners to do this home buyer class and the credit?
I believe
class?
they do. Yes, I believe they do. I know that some of the Habitat recipients who went through the program had to take it also, and they had discussed that it's not just our program, it's any program. It's my understanding from Habitat that they had to have that class.
Okay, so it could be an organization that you could work with, actually.
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Thank you. It takes us to item B, report on Balancing Act online software program.
Megan Kasak
Megan.
will provide that report.
Good evening, Megan Kasak, Communications Coordinator in the Department of Marketing and Civic Engagement. Tonight I'm here to talk with you about our experiences so far with the City of Stillwater's Balancing Act budget simulation tool and our efforts to use it to educate and encourage residents to provide input during the budget preparation phase for fiscal year 2020 and provide another opportunity for them to engage with their local government. Of course, one of our strategic priorities is civic engagement. We've tried to offer many opportunities over the years for citizens to provide input on the budget, including public hearings, budget fairs, coffee hours, encouraging them to submit submissions via email, phone, social media, in person. But after our recent citizen satisfaction survey, which was conducted in 2017, we found that only about 54% of our residents felt they understood how their tax dollars are being used by the city. So we started to look for other opportunities to illustrate how the city budget is created and how they play a part in it. That brings us to the Balancing Act simulation. It's an online tool that allows the residents to realistically create and submit a balanced budget back to the city with the same numbers and the same constraints that our city staff face. One of those is including requiring our residents to submit a balanced budget. They cannot have a deficit because that's something that we also have to keep in mind when we're balancing our budgets. The tool shows how many dollars goes to each expense category and what sources of revenue are available to fund the budget. And then users can increase, decrease, and reallocate the funds as they prefer. And they can also post comments on each category to submit with their report. There's also the companion feature called the taxpayer receipt, which asks residents to provide their age, their annual income, and the percentage of the shopping that they do in Stillwater. And then it will show them how much of their sales tax contributes to each of those expense categories, as shown on the accompanying Balancing Act simulation. Both of these tools pose a really great opportunity for us to educate the public about how the city budget is funded and structured, and how they personally contribute to the city budget. And they also support the third objective of our civic engagement priority, to connect the public with opportunities to be involved in the feedback process at the appropriate level. So the marketing and civic engagement team and the finance team both worked together this past fall to build a simulation of the fiscal year 2019 budget for general fund and airport. And both Balancing Act and Taxpayer Receipt launched on December 30th, 2018. And that made us the first city in Oklahoma to offer both of these tools to our residents. We've been actively promoting Balancing Act and Taxpayer Receipt since the beginning of the year, and we've been asking residents to use Balancing Act to submit a balanced budget recommendation for what they would like to see in the fiscal year 2020 budget, and to submit those by Saturday, March 30th. We're going to compile all that data and present it in a report to City Council and the City Manager's Office as we continue going forward with preparing the fiscal year 20 budget. And as of today, we have had 163 Balancing Act submissions, 745 taxpayer receipt visits, and we've had around 1,800 page views between both of the tools, and over 1,000 of those are for Balancing Act alone.
Megan, how do those numbers compare to the number of people who have attended budget fairs in the past?
Much larger. I would say that.
I went to a couple of those budget fairs.
I did
so
too.
It was me and the staff.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, we want to have opportunities for people to have face-to-face, and we have the pop-up city halls, and people can sign up for Balancing Act or do the Balancing Act while they're there. But this definitely gives them a chance to look at all the components of the budget and how is it structured.
That's
and how is it
fantastic.
It is.
financed.
I think it's great.
tool.
Yeah. And so some of the things that we've already seen on our reports that have been submitted so far are that as far as the revenue and the expenses, the top ones that have been increased, sales tax was actually the top revenue increase and decrease on both of the submitted, on any of the submitted reports. So for the reports that have decreased the sales tax collection, the average decrease was around $181,000. Meanwhile, reports that increased sales tax averaged around an $861,000 increase. Streets, stormwater, and grounds maintenance were the top expense category, increased by an average of $885,000. And then transportation sales tax expense category was second, with an average increase of over $794,000. The transportation sales tax category is actually part of a dedicated funds question. This asked users whether they were supportive of maintaining, increasing, or removing the dedicated half-cent transportation sales tax. So increasing or removing the dedicated tax would actually affect the overall sales tax collection on their report. So that might have contributed to any increased or decreased sales tax revenue averages noted earlier. Our users also showed interest in the recreation expense category that averaged around $671,000 in increased funding, and that category actually includes both a parks and a library subcategory. Meanwhile, on the top expense category decreased was police, with an average reduction of $889,200. Management and support followed, an average decrease of under $291,000. And the reports that had a decrease to streets, stormwater, and ground maintenance averaged around $237,000 in decreased funding.
I would be interested in meeting those people.
Yeah, me too. It would be interesting.
It was you, wasn't it, Roger?
Well, we've learned a lot so far. We're going to learn a little bit more. We still have some time for people to submit their budgets. But we know that our users have been most interested in categories involving streets, recreation, transportation, other police, and sales tax. Our users were also very interested in the different revenue streams available. They opened the different categories anywhere from 74 to 179 times to learn more about them. But ultimately, most of the users increased sales tax significantly more than the other categories and to add more funding to the budget. Going forward, looking at the FY20 budget simulation that we'll do eventually, we're going to look at potential opportunities to maybe add more subcategories under those expense categories, giving people more opportunities to allocate funding. We can consider adding floor levels to the funding amounts for certain expense categories when they are applicable. And we're just going to keep looking at the data that we currently have from this one, look for opportunities that we can educate how these departments are using the funding they currently have to serve the community. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have about Balancing Act or Taxpayer Receipt Tool.
Counselors?
I don't have a question, but it is a wonderful tool if you don't have a clue and just want to, put all your money in one area and it can't.
Did a siren go
That's
off?
exactly, no, but just,
Yes.
I appreciate it, just being able to play with it and see what,
Yeah.
It's a great
See what you could do.
educational
Exactly.
opportunity for our
Exactly.
residents as well as an input opportunity, yes.
I think it's interesting that you can track people opening what they open, so you can see what people are actually interested in.
Absolutely.
Even if it does not elicit a response.
Yes, and on the full report that you'll receive, you'll also see how many times people clicked to add. It's very, very, very interesting, a lot of data.
Yeah.
Well, let's, you said people have until March 30th
Yes, March 30th.
on this budget?
Yes, absolutely. We'll keep Balancing Act up throughout the year. It's
Sure.
always going to be something we'll promote and encourage people to go look at, and then when we have a new budget that goes live, we can make a new simulation. But March 30th is just so that we get all the reports in time to get to all of you so that you can review them.
Can people actually use the sales tax
Receipt?
receipt in
Absolutely.
their taxes?
In their taxes, I don't know about that.
To report their use tax?
Yeah.
It's a good
Well,
idea.
even
Not an accountant.
your sales tax, your city, you estimate your city
Oh.
sales tax.
That's a good idea, though.
mean,
You
if
should
you might
consult
wanna
your
push it.
financial advisor.
Consult your talk to your financial advisor, but
I'm not
that
sure
might
that's
be a really
deductible
good
expense
idea
anymore, is
to
it?
get you to do it before March 30th.
There you go.
Absolutely. Great idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it's a fantastic tool. I love this information. I think for those of you out there who haven't done it yet, or anybody watching, seeing the amount of information we get and can understand from people just using it in town, I think is a great reason for people to go check it out and let us know what they think. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
All right, item C, review of proposed fiscal 2020 budget. Mr. McNichol, or
That would be Christy Gluck again, our
you're it.
finance director.
Okay, Christy Cluck, City Finance Director, and I'm going to talk about reserves. So since October of 2018, staff has been evaluating reserve levels that are currently in place across the organization. So we have consulted best practices that are endorsed by the Government Finance Officers Association as well as the American Public Power Association in order to come up with a methodology that we feel works best for our business environment. We have opted to use different methodologies to calculate the reserves for our enterprise funds versus our general fund. And the reason being is just because the types of activities that are captured in these funds they differ. So the enterprise funds, which are all of our utilities as well as our airport, these fund activities are intended to be self-sustaining through user charges and fees. And these funds are capital intensive and carry debt. So we wanted to make sure that our reserve calculation included our ability to maintain and improve our infrastructure or our capital assets. We wanted it to make sure that we could meet our debt service obligations as well as our ongoing operating and maintenance expenses. On the general fund side, the focus of that fund is on service delivery. There is no debt carried in the general fund, and capital assets are not carried in the general fund. So the focus of that calculation was just on operating and maintenance expenses. And then on all reserve calculations, we have made adjustments for any risk exposure that exists in those individual funds. So the recommendation that staff is making is that the FY20 reserve levels of the city's enterprise funds and general fund be established as identified in the council report that was included in your packet. Staff is also recommending that we be allowed some time to formulate a policy to bring back to you for consideration. So this policy would identify those reserve levels as well as how we're going to maintain those reserve levels going forward, and also the criteria for use of those reserve funds. And then staff would also like to recommend that that policy be adopted via a resolution. The last point that I'll make is just that, to my knowledge, this is the first time that the city has taken these steps to really formalize a reserve policy. And so staff would like to, over the next few years, evaluate the methodology that we've selected and make adjustments where needed. And of course, any adjustments would be brought back to the council for consideration and possible action.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as we're forming this, it'd be nice to maybe have that we review this and continually make sure that the numbers make sense, that the methodology makes sense. And
Yes.
whether that be annually, 2 years, 3 years, however, whatever
Right.
makes sense for staff
Right.
in getting this would be.
And we would like the same.
Yeah.
So. Are there any questions that I can possibly answer?
I think it's such important work that you guys have been doing. We really appreciate all of that work. It's great to kind of see it all laid out, you know, in our positions as they kind of roll through different people. I'm sure you guys on staff sometimes feel that way too. It's so helpful to see it kind of laid out and understand that there's, you know, you're working through that methodology and that we'll be able to revisit and review. And I think just the development of that policy and kind of this baseline is so very important. I really appreciate all the work you guys have done on that.
Yeah, and it's good to see that the current cash balances on these funds, other than the airport, are all where we think they should be, or exceed where we think they should be, which is, I think, indication of good financial management to this point. But again, going back to the point of there's an amount to save, and there's an amount that we need to spend on immediate needs, and balancing that is a very important thing to do. So just to reiterate the recommendation, we're going to leave these balances where they are for now and put these policies in place, and then work forward to, if some of these are a little high or low, we'll have those plans in place for how we're going to balance them out to where they need to be.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We're not pulling any money out of these at this point.
No, we're recommending to leave these balances as they are.
All right. Counselors, any further questions?
No, very nice.
Thank you very much. I assume we don't need a vote on that?
No, this was
Yeah.
informational.
Yep. All right, 2C double 2I, what are we on? Yeah, 2C double I, capital improvement plan? Hey, welcome back.
So now I want to talk about staff's recommendation to address ongoing capital needs of the city. So as we all know, the city operates under tight budget constraints. And so oftentimes the capital investment is one of the first things to go when we're trying to balance the budget. However, capital is critical. It's critical in providing those essential public services that our citizens expect. It's also important as we, implement different economic development efforts, and it's also important to our citizens' satisfaction. So to try to combat the continued deferral of capital investment and maintenance, staff is recommending that the council assist us in identifying an ongoing and sustainable funding source for this. So some options for that may include the designation for capital of positive budget variances that are realized in the general fund each year. It could be just a set dollar amount, determined or transferred at the time that the budget is prepared. It could be that we investigate, passing of a designated sales tax or a bond issue to fund these needs. Staff is also recommending that we create a city capital fund. And so once this funding source is identified, those designated funds would be deposited into and retained within that city capital fund until they were appropriated by the council for that capital use. And so this would really provide accountability and transparency to our citizens in how we're using those funds. And I think it would also help to prioritize capital investment in our annual budget process. And then we talked about in the SUA meeting the $7 million of surplus funds. And so staff is recommending that the $7 million be used to seed the creation of the city capital fund. And staff further recommends that $3 million of that be earmarked for road projects. And then finally, staff recommends that a resolution be drafted to memorialize the creation of that capital fund as well as that funding source, and then the criteria for how those funds can be used.
Could you go into a little bit more detail about what is considered capital?
Capital.
What would we be talking about other than roads, or what
Right.
parts of roads?
So
are
this is
considered?
not anything of the SUA, it's just city capital. So roads, bridges, sidewalks, equipment purchases, vehicle purchases, trying to think what else. What am I missing?
Asphalt, concrete. I mean, the things that we do to
Drainage.
keep the city.
Buildings.
Buildings,
yeah,
yes.
buildings.
I knew I was missing something big.
Building
Haven't
maintenance,
built any of those
roofs.
in a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, building maintenance. I mean, so that's the question, I guess, is between when does it become maintenance and not capital? Is road?
In general, it has been in the past a dollar amount, and I'm assuming still is. If it's
Yeah, general rule of thumb that we use internally is our capitalization threshold is $5,000. So those things that are above $5,000 and that are used over multiple years, we call capital.
Would that be
Just
part of
general
this
rule of
policy?
thumb. That
Identifying
could be,
the types of
the
projects that we're
yeah,
talking about
I would
here?
think that would be.
although there are some reoccurring safety equipment that have to be replaced every 5 years or so that meets that capital criteria, but because it is a reoccurring expense that goes into the M&O or O&M, whichever way we're saying it this time, of the individual department.
Yeah.
The fire department has that, police department has some of those items. There are items that go out of warranty and they're no longer deemed safe, so not everything meets that exact criteria. So there would have to be some exceptions for those.
Some identification in the policy that would
Yeah.
clarify that.
And I don't, maybe this doesn't make sense, but some sort of, and this sort of seems like something for kind of major capital project kind of stuff, not the just $5,000 sort of things
Right.
coming in and out of that, but for
And
the
if there's a
bigger.
threshold that the council would like to use for this specific
Mm-hmm.
purpose, that, I mean, we're open ears, so.
It seems like that's kind of the items we would have in mind for something like this, is to be able to do the bigger projects that we really haven't been able
We
to
haven't
fund
been
out
able-
of general.
Right.
So, but the policy will be developed, or the
Yes.
general
Yes.
idea there?
And then projects as far as, excuse me, things like wastewater, stormwater, that kind of thing falls under SUA, so that would not be included in this fund.
Correct. Stormwater's not under SUA, but yes, wastewater, water, electric, that would all be excluded
That's
from this
excluded.
fund.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I do think this is a great way to offer transparency for how we pay for these kinds of projects. It's, capital funds are something that most communities have something like that. I was kind of surprised that we didn't have one, to be honest with you. But I think it's a great way to be transparent with how we pay for these projects and kind of work with our residents and community in identifying those projects.
Well, and hopefully it helps clarify for city staff, too, some things that can be prioritized, too, and that it allows you to discuss that and know what possibly could be done or what couldn't be done, as opposed to trying to guesstimate.
Right.
This gives you a little bit more clarity for you
Right.
guys, which
Right.
is important.
Yeah.
We'll look forward to seeing that resolution.
All right.
Thank you. Item 2C, the III CC 19-36, general overall budget.
Well, you've had highlighted for you this evening the big ticket items, and now we're down to the minutia. And there's not much change really in the factors going into the composition of fiscal '20 budget. Revenues are flat. We are not projecting any increase in sales or use taxes. I did call and visit with the Tax Commission with Mr. Maston, who's the executive director. For the state, they are only proposing a 2% increase in sales tax. So there are a lot of things they get sales tax on that we don't.
Where's our Amazon money?
Well, if you look at use tax has become more on an upward trajectory. So you might make that assumption that some of that is reported there in use tax. And remember, use tax and sales tax are related to each other. It depends on how the product is brought into the state, so to speak. So.
But that stuff I order on Amazon should be producing sales tax now, right? I mean, we should eventually, or at some point, we're going to see that?
Or we may see it in the other pot of use
Okay.
tax. It just, and again, remember our confidentiality agreement with the Tax Commission.
Well,
One of the issues that really concerns me is the formula that OTC uses to determine where that use tax goes. And
Yes, but these types of use tax that are reported by a vendor or a contractor, they are specifically designated for the city of Stillwater. They're tracking those goods and services to their endpoint. The only allocation comes from the use tax that you and I remit on our Form 511. And those things, I know, Norman, you and I have had this discussion. Those are, it's an allocation, if you will, based on use tax remittances from a rolling, I can't remember if it's a rolling 3 months, there's an allocation process. And that's to compensate for the fact that we move around. You know, you may have paid your use tax or paid your bought your product while you lived in Edmond, but then in October, guess what? You moved to Stillwater. So should Stillwater get all of the use tax that you remit on that year's 511? They're trying to compensate for that one. I'm not opining on any of it, but just trying to understand it.
I guess, I mean, I continue to wonder why we haven't seen, I mean, we talked about it for a long time, the state talked about it for a long time, we passed state law, and, I mean, to whatever extent it was effective, but, I mean, there was an expectation that we were going to start to see a little bit more of a sales tax increase from collecting internet vendors.
And I'm right there with you. I really did expect to see both of those taxes take more of an uptick. And I don't know that we've really seen that. We're going to exceed our budget for this year, I believe, as looking at where we are year to date, but not, and maybe I had unreal expectations, Mayor. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I guess, is there a mechanics issue at this point? I mean, in terms of the being collected to the state?
I think that could be some of it.
Have they not worked out all the kinks at this point?
I think that could be some of it, although the state of Oklahoma was situated better than a lot of states because we are a streamlined sales tax member, so we're working collaboratively with the other states that participate in that agreement, that intrastate agreement. But I will continue to monitor.
What's the 2% increase in Oklahoma's projections this year?
2%.
What is it? What's it from?
Optimism.
It could be.
Internet sales?
It could be that it's from them collecting sales tax on the sale of oil and gas production equipment. So anytime you sell a well, you're selling the equipment and they are gathering
So a large
sales
portion of
tax.
it is not online sales tax.
I can't speak to that, Dr. Wedlake. I don't know.
Logical question.
We'll still be waiting. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Okay. But for us here in Stillwater, a conservative approach says that our sales and use tax are going to remain sales at 28.4 million and use tax at 1.6 million. So we're stable. We have, and I will tell you, I'll take that all day long. Being stable is a good thing. But when you're a community as we are with young people and this thirst to grow and have amenities and change, stable doesn't get you there. You need to have growth in your revenue. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for growth in our revenue, and how do we accomplish that? We have seen some changes in our fees, in our permitting structure. The change in the alcohol rules affected us. We did away with some of the fees, and we're collecting larger fees now. But again, we're talking thousands and not millions is where we need to be. So that's stable. The transfers, again, I know are problematic, and you all received in your packet the big sheet of transfers. Hopefully the two columns still equaled when I sent it to you. They should have equaled down there at the bottom, the ins and the outs. We are going to see an increase in transfers. You just approved one of those increases back on the SUA meeting for $7 million. We're moving it out of the SUA and into the citywide capital fund, and that is going to be housed in the general fund. So you're going to see some of those make those numbers tick up. We really we did not budget any payroll increases for fiscal year 20 for non-union employees. We are still in negotiations with the police and fire, but for our general employees, there is not a wage increase. You did one back in December of 2018. You gave everybody an across-the-board 4% increase, and we thank you for that. So the topic of interest for all of us, if you look at the Balancing Act comments and some of the maneuvering that's been done in Balancing Act, it all centers around transportation. And so I thought I would highlight for us this evening some of the ways that we are trying to funnel as much money as we can into transportation. And in transportation, Monty, you correct me if I get off track here, but transportation is just not cars, but it's pedestrian, it's bicycles, so that's sidewalks and lanes. How are we going to, number one, improve the asset that we have, and number two, expand and further that asset? So as Christy had talked about in the SUA, we've asked you for an additional $3 million of funding for transportation projects. This is over and above the $1.5 million that was in the citywide capital plan that we're going to bring back to you. Monty had asked for transportation, had asked for a little over $1 million to do design work and engineering on the Sanger Road project. You will see in the next fiscal year, I believe, what's asked for there and how we're going to fund that is $5.4 million for the actual construction on that project. So we're starting to try and stage these projects in. At our April 22nd study session, all we are going to do is talk about transportation and roads and how do we fund this and what is the life cycle of a project from conception of the project and identification of the need through funding, through design and bidding, to letting the contract to the contractor, giving them the notice to proceed, through the conclusion and dedication of that project. It can be 2 to 3 years. It could be even longer, I would think, with some of these big projects. And so we lose track of where we are. We're trying to do better about keeping everybody apprised. Been visiting with marketing and civic engagement. How do we keep our citizens up to date and up to speed with where we are on these projects? Just to kind of recap what we've done the last 2 years with transportation, you have pots of money, so you have monies in general fund. And right now in the general fund, that is funding just the day-to-day personnel costs and operation costs of the engineers and the inspectors and the project managers and the staff in public works that goes out and pours the sidewalks and patches the holes and pour anything concrete. That's where it is housed in public works. We have a little fund, I call it Fund 215, it's the Transportation Fee Fund, and that fee comes from developers. When they come in to get a permit to build, they pay a transportation fee into that fee fund. That is a smaller fund, it only generates about $100,000 a year, and its money is building up. Paula and I were visiting about this today, and I think over its lifespan, those funds have been used to do studies of sorts, master plans, those things along those lines. So we have that money. We have the half-cent sales tax. And right now, with sales tax being static, so is its money. It's static at about $4 million coming in every year. And then we have these over and above funds that we've identified. So if you remember back in October of 2018, you approved $6 million to be moved out of the SUA and or retained in the general fund, because the general fund had a hand in this as well. And that monies were dedicated to transportation, the 3rd Street Bridge, the Husband Street Bridge, and then Monty had some other projects identified, and so he is working on those. So to date, if you look at 19 and 20 together, we've dedicated $25.4 million in these 2 fiscal years to transportation. Now, is it going to happen tomorrow? No. I wish I had that magic wand. That would be nice. But it takes time, and especially since we're a government entity, it takes a little more time than private sector at times has to work with. So, transportation. Questions? Anything?
I do like your comment about working with marketing. And, you know, the interest that we see in Balancing Act and in all of our emails and casual encounters on the corner. People are very focused on streets, sidewalks, bikes, everything.
Yes.
And it might be interesting to you know, be able to just put out, you know, what 10 streets do you absolutely think need to be fixed in what order?
Well,
with the prices,
yes.
with estimates of prices.
Monty, you have that, don't you, through pavement management? You've got some of that identified through pavement
Well,
management.
I mean from citizens,
Oh, from citizens. Well, from reading the Balancing
Live
Act
Street.
comments,
Well,
University, people are screaming about University
list.
Avenue.
kind of.
And Duck.
And, I mean, just about any street that travels.
Keep in mind that Bill's got water lines and sewer lines, so that a lot of times when we got to look at the street, we got to look at Bill's water lines and sewer lines. And unfortunately, where Bill's got some really bad water and sewer lines, we got some good streets. And where we got some really bad streets, he's got fairly decent water and sewer lines. So which one do we do first? So that fits into the mix as well sometimes.
And that information communicated to citizens in a way that is easily understood would be fabulous.
Okay. Understand.
Thank you, Monty.
We need like a map
Yeah.
with the streets that we've heard people complain about, then you could click on that section of street and see, here it's on this list, or here's why we're gonna do it later, or
explanation of
here's,
what-
you
yeah.
know, with all
Why-
of those.
why-
Well, I
just
think
under-
a cost analysis on that would be helpful
Yeah.
as well for
Sure.
that section of
Yeah.
street. You know, for
Absolutely.
this mile, it's going to cost $800,000.
And it needs, you know, just pavement, or it needs stormwater infrastructure, or water line infrastructure. I think it's really easy to forget that all that stuff, the guts of
Sure.
the road, and what's under there, and what might need to be replaced.
And you don't think
It's
about
not
it. I
just the
didn't think that
pavement that you're
about that.
driving on, or the sidewalk that you're walking along. There's a lot more costs that we incur as a city. And just understanding that, I think, would be really helpful.
We also need to just spend some more money on it.
Well,
Find some more money
we're
to spend
Start
on it
getting
and
some
fix it.
projects
Believe
done would be
me,
great,
as
too.
city manager's office, we are very focused on the
Yeah.
fact that we need to find money to put towards this. So we're going to talk about that in a minute, too. Monty, how much does it cost per lane mile?
Not a simple answer, was it?
It may depend on which road it is.
Yeah, it does depend on, and it depends on a lot of factors. The type of street, if it's an arterial, well, we obviously make it thicker. We got more width. Are we adding pedestrian and bikeways? That can add 15-20% to the cost of a lane mile. And so I don't really have, how much drainage do we have to do? What's the soil like? In the past, we only worried about from the dirt on up. Now we worry about from the top of the dirt down. If it's really bad soil, do we have to stabilize that? And then if we have groundwater, and that's a lot of our issues are that we never addressed groundwater in the past. So then that requires us to go in and put under drains. So it's a very difficult number to give to you, and I don't have it off the top of my head either.
It's not
But
cheap.
I can get it to you. It's not cheap. It's not cheap. And when you do it cheap, it doesn't
Yep.
Pay for it.
give you problems later on down the road.
We will, again, we're going to dive deep into transportation on the 22nd of April. So kind of, that's the big thing that's happening in the general fund. The rest of it is we're rocking along. And I did include for you back on the SUA in your packet listings of the items that right now we have that we're considering for the city capital fund. And so you will see police cars there. We really need 12, but we put in for 8. Police cars. We need a new ladder truck, and we've been able, our fire chief has been able to find monies to fund that $1 million truck, and the piece coming out of the general fund's $200,000. So kudos to Chief Bradley for finding the pots of money out there. I was trying to think what else was on there. Oh, IT. We need a server refresh, and that's $500,000 or better. So we're looking at that for this year. Thank you again, though, for the fleet refresh on our desktops. We've all been enjoying those new desktops and the upgraded operating system. There's some building items. There's parks and rec items. There's 3 parks that I think need new playground apparatuses. Those apparatuses were installed back in the late 90s. So you can see they're getting pretty long in the tooth. And these are the more smaller neighborhood parks. But the pool needs some attention, and hopefully we're going to partner again with YMCA for the pool. But it needs a new slide. And a pool slide is $60,000. I know. It took my breath away, too.
Plastic, right?
Well, yes.
How much is a diving board?
It's cheap, but your insurance.
A whole lot of that is products liability. A lot of that.
And
is built
staff
into-
is really, the slide for the pool was one that we were kind of picking on, but we've really tried to say, can we do without it? Can we take it down? We just have to do it.
Yeah.
We have several roofs that we're needing to replace. The roof on the airport terminal it needs to be taken down to the decking and built back up. It's a flat roof, and it's had several applications, but it's getting to the point now where it can't have another application, I think, from a structural standpoint. So we're looking at replacing the roof. We had the money in this year's budget to do the design work. We've contracted with an architect, and he's working on that, and then we will do the construction in the new fiscal year. The community center roof, that big wind that we had, 2-3 weeks ago, Well, it was flapping in the wind. Again, it's a flat top roof that has a membrane up there, and somehow the membrane, the wind got underneath it, and it was just like the sail on a boat. It was just flapping. Senior Center roof, we have the money for it, and yes, we will be replacing it here, I think this spring. But you can see our buildings, all of our assets need some attention, and it's going to be a struggle here for a little while to get caught up, because how do you prioritize and what comes first? Well, roofs are pretty essential, I think. So, okay. So go back and refer to those. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to email Norman or myself, and we'd be glad to visit with you about that. Jumping to CETA. CETA's small these days, and it's because the bid is no longer in existence. It houses just overall economic development. It houses our contracting for visitor development. It does house what was the remainder of the bid, and that money is dedicated to the maintenance of our downtown landscaping, and so we see bills come in that for that maintenance of that landscaping. As an interesting note, we've been able to collect on some of the bid assessments that were in arrears. The property either came up for sale, or the owner became aware that the bid assessment was in arrears, and they came and paid. So it's been interesting to watch as that is closed out, but that's money that goes back into that pot for that designated purpose. It also houses our TIFs. And so we have 3 TIFs in the city. The first TIF is out to the north, what we call the Academy. And its money is coming off every month from general fund, because that's where the sales tax is deposited, and it's going over to CETA to make those their 2 biannual payments that we make to the developer. The second TIF is out to the west, and nobody's really availed themselves of it yet. It's a sales tax TIF. And then the third TIF is our new one, the Downtown Campus Link, and it is an ad valorem and sales tax TIF. And as of yet, we have not had a contract to come in and consider there. But those are all housed within CETA. The biggest change to CETA is we asked for an increase in legal fees for this year, as we are consulting with the Center for Economic Development on some of these development projects, and so that's a good thing. The sales tax and arrears agreements, I did want to let you know that there are There's 6 of them left that need to pay out. And the first one is going to expire in August of 2019, and the furthest one out will expire in April of 2022. And again, if they don't meet their deliverables for sales tax, whatever those were, they won't get paid. It either you get what you get up until the cutoff point. So.
I think that's a funny name, sales tax and arrears. It just automatically makes me think someone hasn't paid something that they have to, and that's not what it means.
No, it means that we wait until they pay their sales tax and go back and calculate what their share is going to be.
Right. So
And that may be unique to Stillwater. That may be a unique name to Stillwater. It may be something else entirely, but that seems to be what's meaningful for us. Yeah. So
It doesn't mean that somebody hasn't paid us money.
No. It means that we are not going to advance them that money, which some incentives are done that way. They are advanced. We're waiting until they meet their deliverable, and then it's a rebate, basically, rebating them the money. Mm-hmm. And then lastly is the SUA, and the big things that are happening here, again, pretty conservative approach to expenditures and revenue. Through discussions, we have increased the revenue in electric for this year. Looking back over our history of budget to actual, we were constantly, for the last 2 or 3 years, exceeding our budget, so we felt like we could move our budget up to meet that. That's probably one of the biggest changes. The rate study, we are very excited to get moving forward on that rate study. I'm sure as I have, you all have had the questions too, are the rates right? And we don't know. And so that's why we're calling in the consultants to help us. And we're going to get in a better pattern. Best practice recommends that you have this done every 5 years, and you do a mid-cycle at about 3 years, a little bit of like a desk review, and you go back and just make sure that those things are tracking the way you want them to. And the transfers, thanks to Christie's hard work with reserves, we see that we have a little bit more money that we can deploy on these other big projects that need to be seen to. So that's the budget that we are going to bring back to you. Going to have the public hearing on April the 15th. And again, we will have time for discussion, listen to the public and see what their input is, and then we will bring back for final adoption on May the 13th. I think it is May the 13th, that second meeting in May. And again, we've got a holiday in there, so we're pushing things around. So that's kind of the budget process and where we stand right now. Questions? Comments?
When is the draft budget published out?
I will send it to the news press. It needs to be 5 days before the public hearing. I usually publish it for the 2 Sundays before that public hearing.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll do it again in May as well. And there's plenty of opportunity for change. I'm happy to send my workbook to you if you'd like, or it's really now Christy and I's workbook, if you would like to see the granular detail. So.
Sounds like fun.
Very much detail right here.
I was trying to remember what all we did include in here, in your packet. So we kind of have this high-level comparison. It shows you exactly, number one, it shows you how 18 panned out and what our ending fund balance was and how that fund balance was earmarked. Remember, we carry forward anything that's not completed in the fiscal year, especially if it's in a project. We're going to carry that money over. Again, the adopted budget for 18-19 and how we account for that shortfall in the general fund. This is Norman's favorite because it really highlights for you, I think, the reader, the need for the transfer out of the SUA. We could not deliver the services that our citizens deserve and expect if it hadn't been for the SUA. The next column over is where we are today, what our current budget, and actually I think this was through, January 31st, yeah, where that current budget is, and then what our proposed 1920 budget is. In my footnotes, my ABCD, that's showing you the movement of the fund balances and how they move through there. And then we came in and dropped in a column so you could see the combined effect of the city capital fund with the general fund. Because the columns you're looking at to your left do not include those capital assets.
So yeah, the 2019-20 proposed budget on transportation public works says $3.258 million, which is just the money that's coming out of the 2% general fund. Or is that doesn't include the half-cent transportation sales tax money, correct?
Correct. It does not.
And then, so then when you go over to that $8 million number on the far right, that includes all the money out of the half-cent sales tax?
No, it's just out of the capital city fund.
That's the 7.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So the final budget for transportation in 2020 would be 12?
Yes, when you add that half-cent sales tax in there.
Okay. Well, that's better than I thought.
It's deceptive because we've got money in so many pots.
Yeah, so this is just the 2 cents of the sales tax that we get for general fund use.
Correct.
And ancillary.
Yes, and the city capital fund, because there was no capital in the column that says proposed 20 budget, and city manager had asked that we show that as well.
Okay.
And rightfully so. You also had a copy of the transfer, so you can see exactly what fund is moving money where. A lot of the funds move money into the self-insurance fund. We're self-insured for health insurance. The employees pay a certain premium, but then everything else is on the city to pay. And I'm really happy to say that I think our premiums are going to stay static again this year, which is, we're waiting for the other shoe to fall because that's getting just unheard of. But yeah, we're very pleased about that. And kudos to our employees for being very conscientious about their health and their well-being. That's reflective of in the claims. And then you had the all funds statements for 20 and for fiscal year 19, so you could kind of see where I got some of my comparison numbers from. Questions?
Counselors, questions for Melissa?
It was helpful to hear you describe all this.
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Rather than just reading it.
Yes.
Well,
Little tiny big figures that are
I know.
great big numbers.
I really did try charts, and the charts just didn't translate well. I'm still working on that. I'm going to try and perfect that one of these days, because I do think visual is much better for people.
Yeah.
It is for me, anyway.
Okay.
Great. So we'll see you back on the 15th, and we'll have our public hearing, and we'll move forward.
We'll be here the first two, though.
Well, I know you will, but we won't be talking about budget. I appreciate your time this evening, and I did want to give a thanks to all our department heads that are here this evening. They wanted to hear this discussion about budget and hear your input into the formation of the budget, and so I really appreciate their taking the time to be here this evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
you.
All right, that takes us to the end. I closed my book already. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the city council meeting. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, we're now adjourned. Thank you all for being here.
I think I'm going to take this.
Never mind. It's okay.
I was going to